understand that there is no direct no which will be said. The Japan-India relationship is really a strong one. Tokyo is a very vibrant city. Both Rakuten as well as Mercari, they do annual recruitment, campus recruitments from India, sponsoring visa for your parents to be able to live with you. Japanese in general tend to respect people who are actually making an effort.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Staying Indian, the NRI podcast. Now, if you are interested in Japanese culture, if you like sushi, if you like anime, and if you want to find out opportunities for Indians in Japan, then stay tuned. Deepesh Hinduja. Deepesh is a seasoned professional with 20 years of experience. He has 10 plus years of experience in Japan market. He has worked with major pharmaceuticals in Japanese market. And he is living in Japan from past 10 years and knows Japan in and out.
Hey, hi, Gaurav. Thank you for having me. Hi to you and your audiences.
So as they say in Japan, Deepesh sir, can you tell us more a bit about yourself and how you have been living in Japan for past 10 years?
Sure, absolutely. I have more than 20 plus years of experience, out of which 12, 13 years I have been in Japan. My relationship with Japan started back in 2006. It was the first time ever when I came to Japan, and that was truly unintentional. I had no idea what Japan is and what it held. There were only glimpses of some cultural understanding of, as you mentioned, sushi and samurai and anime. When I did come to Japan for the first time, I must confess that I came in truly with the intent that I'll just immerse myself in this new exquisite culture, and probably 6 to 9 months to a year assignment, and then I'll be back. Japan grows on you. Over a period of time, I stayed, and here I am today with 12, 13 plus years and counting. Slowly, I learned Japanese language, culture, and then immersed myself. And off recently, I am working with major pharmaceutical companies. Within pharma, drug safety and pharmacovigilance are my forte. In addition to that, I do also help a lot of companies, pharma and otherwise, to actually have Japan market entry, build their strategy, pan out their executions. Because Japan is really not a easy market, especially for somebody who doesn't understand it and has not dealt with it. In addition to that, I'm also a co-founder at a startup called MyDarbar. We'll touch upon that later today. And then finally, I do also dabble with Web3 initiatives. So I am a contributor to a platform called Flex Ecosystem in Web3.
Amazing. You are also an angel investor, and I think that's how we kind of reconnected. And in full disclaimer, Deepesh is my uncle. So we are related. We know each other from a long time. But Deepesh, Japan is kind of a mystic land, people do not know much about it. There are some things that are here and there, coming out. So when you kind of traveled back in like 12 years ago, as you stated, what was some of the things that took you by surprise in the cultural change?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the first few years were by no means easy. There were many surprises back then, and some of them still do exist, right? For example, it was very hard for me to actually understand that there is no direct no which will be said, right? So if you ask a question or if you're asking somebody for something, they won't straight tell you a no on the face, right? You have to basically work your way up to understand the inclination of the individual and the level of participation which the individual would bring to the table. So that was a major shock to begin with. As you spend time, you basically tend to understand there are verbal and non-verbal cues through which you can basically understand how much interested the other party is. And then basically you start working toward building your yes. You start with the stage very close to no, and then you start building towards your yes. So that's basically something which I had to learn and understand as I go by. Another quick example which I'll share is that in Japan, in a professional world, if you are having, let's say, a formal meeting, you are going to a prospective customer's place, you are having a meeting with them face to face. Not every question has equal weightage and meaning. There are cues through which you can judge and assess. Right. A simple way to do that is there is a clear Japanese way in which the seating in the meeting will be done, right? So if you have to understand that who is the decision-making authority in this meeting, The easiest way to identify is look for the chair which most farthest away from the door. That individual is somebody who has the highest level of authority. He or she will predominantly be speaking in the last. This came to me as a surprise, and over a period of time, I built my understanding and worked my way. So now I think, yeah, there's good understanding, and we can work towards a more productive output from a cultural.
Basic. So I did got a glimpse of these kind of ways of working that you just described in a recent documentary that I saw on Netflix on Fukushima. So it
Uh-huh.
beautifully explains how they kind of dealt with the situation, which was and a lot of people uh, were not able to say no on certain circumstances. So I can totally relate to it. So, but yeah, Indian Japan relations are very strong in terms of the ties and goes very long back as well. So I assume there would be a lot of influential people in from Indian background in the Japanese society as well. Can you highlight some of these?
As you mentioned, right, the Japan-India relationship is really a strong one when it comes to within the Asia. The Japan-India relationship took actually a whole new warmth, a level of warmth when Abe-san came into picture. Right? So he started putting together a very look west kind of policy where India was given more preferential treatment to be able to have a mechanism for China. There are a few clear examples like the bullet train project in India. Then there are other infrastructure projects which are coming up in northeast region of India. Those and all, if you see, they are more strategic in nature. They are long-term projects. These projects are being financed by Japan in Japanese yen and not US dollars. So that's another lever there in Japan-India relationship. Talking about who are those people who have acted as pillars in this whole journey, there are many individuals who have done pretty well in different walks of lives. I will give you a few examples here, and with that you'll be able to appreciate that the people who have actually come in and embrace the Japanese culture and are bearing the Indian flag here, how far along in the journey they have brought this whole relationship. From the historical perspective, predominantly there were businessmen who came in Japan first. Some of them were definitely dealing into Indian and other products. Right. So Hira-san and Chandrani-san, these two individuals are somebody who are kind of key pillars within the Indian community, right? So Hira-san, he lives in Yokohama. Yokohama is another port city, right? So these early settlers who were businessmen, they came in and established themselves in the port city, mostly in Yokohama. There's a big community there. Chandrani-san, he's one of the biggest suppliers of tea, Indian tea here, Assam tea, and otherwise in Japan. So these individuals established themselves, and not only themselves, but they kind of created a sort of an ecosystem where more and more Indians felt more comfortable to come and settle. So Yokohama, as I mentioned, where Hida-san established himself, Chandrani-san in Nishikasai. So these two are a kind of Indian hub places where a lot of Indian restaurants, and there's a lot of Indian people who come and settle down. Right. So this is from the business perspective. Then, if you look at more from the professional angle, there are few individuals like Anil Raj, who initially came in as an IT professional. But then, because he wanted to set up his own businesses, he has a chain of Indian restaurants. He run a kindergarten and a language training school, and so on and so forth. So he is somebody who's done pretty well for himself and also for the Indian community. Two more examples, if I'll give you. One is an individual called Nalin Advani. He is again of Indian origin. He has established himself pretty well, and he's somebody who's really looked upon from a angel investment startup advisory kind of role. He's somebody who is also heading the Thai organization here, and he's pretty well connected into the startup and world here in Japan. And one last example I'll give you, which is a very unique path, which is there's an individual called Yogendra Puranik. He initially came in having learned Japanese. He came into Japan, and then later he naturalized himself as as a Japanese national, and now he's contesting elections like a Japanese individual, and he also sit local mayor office and so on. So these are some examples of individuals who have really done well and who have not only established themselves but created more like a conducive environment for the society as a whole. So yeah, I'll like to give their examples.
Amazing. So, sounds like a lot of Indians are doing quite well. And I think that's one of the reason of starting this podcast as well, to celebrate these people. Sometimes, living far away from India, a lot of individuals do not know what works in the background is these kind of people bring countries closer, and there is a lot of support and economic development that happens through these channels. So to celebrate them and their success. But when people, new people, let's say new Indians are coming to Japan, they'll find a lot of difference between the culture, the cities, the ways of working. How is Tokyo different from any metropolitan metro cities in India? And what are some of the resources that people who are kind of migrating now can use in Tokyo or in other cities?
Yeah, Tokyo is a very vibrant city, and when it comes to when it comes to the public transport, cleanliness, safety, it ranks in top three, top five cities in the world. Safety, security, not only in Tokyo but all across Japan, is one of the safest country. You wouldn't have to worry about petty crimes on streets and so on and so forth. So that kind of is soothing fact when it comes to comparing it with other cities in the world. The public transport is pretty awesome. There are trains which ply almost during the commute hours. It's 2 to 3 minutes, every 2 to 3 minutes you have a train. It's very hard to find a place within Tokyo where you cannot reach by public transport.
And how can people find out jobs in Japanese market from an Indian perspective?
Gone are those days when there were only people from tier one colleges who landed job in Tokyo, right? There used to be a time when only IITs and IIM grads were being recruited from India directly from your campus, I mean, right? And they were directly being placed in either Tokyo, Hong Kong, New York, and so on, right? Those were pretty early days. Nowadays, there's a whole lot of avenues through which one can land a job in Tokyo. If I quickly speak about what all industries there are in Japan where there are jobs predominantly, so there are of course classical industries like there's manufacturing, automobiles, there is healthcare, right? There is banking, right? So these are definitely the classical industries. Nowadays, there are things more and more coming up which are more horizontal as well from IT perspective. So digital transformation, AI, Web3, these are the new age avenues which are building up more and more jobs for individuals. So, of course, there used to be a time when you must know Japanese language to a certain extent to be able to even qualify for an interview. Right. Nowadays, there are companies who have English as an official language. Predominantly, most of the multinational companies who were headquartered outside of Japan and do have a shop in Japan, they have English as an official language. Right. You speak about any FANG company, they have office here. Their official language is English. You speak about any Indian, IT services or consulting company, they have offices here, right? Then there are companies like Rakuten and Mercari. So Mercari is nothing but what we see in India as OLX, use staff platform P2P, right? So both Rakuten as well as Mercari, they do annual recruitment, campus recruitments from India, and not only tier one colleges, but they also do go to tier two as well many a times. So yeah, and I think another aspect will be that these companies who do have their own India branch, they do welcome and promote people to be transferred internally, right? So I've seen many people, coming in for a 2 to 3 years tenure, who used to work in cities like Pune and Bangalore for these Japanese companies, right? And with a 2 year, exposure, then that gives them an opportunity to find options to either stay back and so on and so forth. So there are multiple aspects, both from campus recruitment, to lateral hiring. There are aspects which have grown and evolved now. So yeah, I think the job market is definitely much more mature, and the opportunities are very much out there available, and not only in terms of the language, a lot of prerequisites have actually gone down.
Okay. And when I see the global trends, even in Europe, there is a crunch of jobs, availability, there is unemployment rate on the rise, majorly because of, companies are assessing how AI would play a role in their business processes, right? So how do you see the Japanese market trends in past few years, especially after COVID?
Change a lot, right, for everybody, right? And if we speak about Japan and how it has affected and helped the whole Japanese market evolve. So the Japan market and the whole job ecosystem actually took leaps and bounds, post COVID, right? Let me give you a few examples, right? So pre-COVID, of course, work from home wasn't a norm, but more so in Japan, where I was, as I was explaining in an early example, where you have to basically soak in a lot of verbal and non-verbal cues. Doing business in such a high context environment remotely was definitely something which was not visualized pre-COVID, but post-COVID it became a norm. Right, especially for places who, and that kind of became a differentiator for how open-minded you as a company are. And not only that, but there are, see, I come from compliance. Digital signatures used to be looked down upon, or back in those days, the red stamp, which we call it hanko in Japanese. Those were pretty much the norm. But post COVID, digital signatures established itself as a pretty de facto a way to actually do business. Even contracts are being signed digitally online without even a single face-to-face meetings. Those are the things which have evolved post-COVID. Now, if we look at from a macro perspective, Japan is social infrastructure. If you look at of Japan, it's an aging society. Right? Meaning that there are more than 60% people who are either close to retirement age or they will retire in next few years. It is a society where a whole lot of manual labor related work must be either automated, or you need to basically bring in more short-term labor from outside to be able to meet that demand. So a quick example on this will be, imagine there are jobs which are either low skill, unskilled labor related, like you need to do harvesting in season on the farms, or you need to do construction, right? Those kind of unskilled labor related jobs. All these jobs are pretty much getting automated, and there are more and more robots which are now being built to fit the purpose, right? So that is one new aspect which is coming up. But as if this wasn't existing pre-COVID and this just started pre-COVID, but the gravity of this problem was realized much more at a very high scale post-COVID, when it's locked down and there's nobody to actually serve and construct homes and whatnot, right? Another example would be the healthcare, workers like nurses and all, right? There is a big dire need so there is the patient to nurse ratio is off the chart, no way to meet that, right? So the solutions are basically either, if you can automate it and have a robot do it for you. If not, then either bring in short-term labor from other Asian countries, right? This is for unskilled labor. But for skilled specifically, if we talk about from a immigration rule and regulation perspective as well, there's a lot of liberalization which has happened in past few years, right? Back in the days when I landed in Japan for the very first time, there were only two types of visa which was there. So either one was like engineer visa, which you get to begin with for a year or two, and then you can renew it, and so on and so forth. Or you basically, and you live for 10 years, so you get a permanent residency, right? So that was the structure back. I had landed first time, but now if you look at this plethora of options, engineer visa is definitely one. Nowadays, there is a high skill visa, which basically is, if you have high skill, then there are certain rules. If your salary structure is in place and you have a master's degree and so on and so forth, if you qualify for that, that basically brings in a whole new whole new aspect of benefits which you can avail from sponsoring visa for your parents to be able to live with you as your dependents in Japan, to actually being able to bring in a maid or a chauffeur as well. So, and plus nowadays, there's a whole new area of visa which is startup visa, right? Or if somebody wants to do remote work while being in Japan, right, and still maintain their tax residency, someplace else. So those kind of visas as well are now available. The PR, the qualification criteria for PR, permanent residency, has been also very, very liberalized. It's very easy to be to attain a PR in just a matter of 3 years. If you are on a high skill visa, you can basically go and get a permanent residency in Japan.
So you kind of touched upon the rate at which robotics and other IT automations are progressing, and I think Japanese have a high adoption rate in terms of adopting these new technologies. We have seen amazing videos coming out of Japan with dolls and with robots, and yeah, it's
Eyeball,
so
yeah.
exactly. So, how the startup ecosystem is shaping up these new adoptions, and what are the new emerging technologies that Japanese, are leading in terms of startup and innovation.
See, when it comes to startup ecosystem, if we compare it to the Silicon Valley, Japan lost that whole era in which that exponential growth was actually happening, right? Of recently, Japan has started to look how to establish itself as a very vibrant startup ecosystem. And there are a lot of places where who are now promoting to more and more startups to come in. There's a lot of help available. There's a lot of accelerated programs being set up. There are a lot of governments who are actually putting together grants to help startup to grow, from as basic as to sponsoring co-working spaces to being able to provide necessary means to be able to test the product market fitment, right? Now there are clear policies and reforms which have been put together by the government in participation with the private players. I'll give you one example. There's a policy called Angels Ace, which basically means there's a tax benefit which an individual can avail if you are investing into an angel startup. The startup has to qualify for certain criteria, but from an Indian context, if we compare, imagine the 80C benefit which we get from investing in mutual funds and insurance scheme. Imagine if the same is applicable on startups. So the amount of money which can come into that whole ecosystem from a startup perspective is so such policies are actually benefiting the ecosystem. And then Japan has been at the forefront of Web3, crypto as such, and Web3 projects were way too cool and common in Japan even before it became a fad in Middle East and other places. Another aspect these days which I do see is definitely healthcare, especially digital intervention. So software as a medical device. Space is another aspect which I clearly see. And security, right? Is another aspect. So these are clear areas where I personally am seeing a lot of traction, a lot of new companies coming up with really cool innovative solutions.
So I think in coming years, India is all set to bypass Japan in terms of being the largest economy, and Japan is on fourth rank right now. And being such a small island, and still managing to be a biggest economy in the world, what are some of the major industries or major export that you see that happens?
Major export from Japan has been cars and high tech, right? That can include engineering solutions. Companies like Kawasaki Heavy Industries are here, who are not only into automobiles, but there are other aspects as well which they are involved in, right? And then of course, the majority of the car manufacturers are in Japan, as we know it. So with the whole advent of EV and autonomous driving, that is clearly a next level of game changing aspect which will bring in. It depends on on, it is yet to be seen in next, few coming years, what extent Japan and the Japanese companies can put together innovative solutions on top of the classical, momentum which they already have in place. So that is definitely something which I'm very much keen in. Another aspect which I am very much interested in looking forward to is, when it comes to EV, there is not just cars, but there is much more beyond that. If we start looking at trucks, if we start looking at planes, autonomous planes, and so on and so forth. So there is there's a whole new gamut of of technology should emerge in next few years, and that can actually shape up how the whole transportation is being looked upon by our next generation.
Yeah, I think so. And a lot of innovation happens in mobility. Mobility is one of the leading fronts, whether it be cars, trains, or planes. So, and I'm sure Japan would lead world's way in that. We have understood what is the startup ecosystem. We have understood the futuristic industry and how India, Japan would play a key role in coming years in terms of partnership. Can you give some actionable tips or sites which people can use to actually find jobs in Japan, and what are some of the requirements that they need to fulfill?
So clearly, there are those usual suspects like LinkedIn and Indeed, right? These websites are clearly there where people do find jobs. Now it does help being in Japan to be able to search job in Japan. It's not necessarily a must criteria, but it does helps because as I was mentioning, a lot of times first few interviews can still happen remotely, but at the end of the day, a handshake can happen only physically. That is still the mindset with which a lot of companies do proceed with. Apart from LinkedIn and Indeed and these kind of job websites, a lot of because Japan tends to be a very high context, environment, even professionally. A lot of recruitment and headhunting actually happens by these recruitment agencies. I can give you a few examples like Robert Half, Michael Page, Hayes. These sort of recruitment companies who have their own databases through which they keep on giving introductions to the companies. So I think the best way for anybody who is not bilingual, right, who's not Japanese bilingual, would be to be able to search your job fitment on these websites and start applying from there and then start building upon that. One key advice which I would definitely recommend to anybody who do want to apply in Japan is when it comes to resume, right, or CV, right, you do need to be very conservative in what you're writing there, right? When it comes to Japan and the Japanese companies in general, if you're writing something and if you have worked upon it, it will come to surface, right? Just writing something which you either know about it or have heard it doesn't cut it. So just be very prudent in that aspect, that do mention only what you have actually used in your past experiences, so that the sincerity and confidence is clearly shown. That enhances your whole trustability factor, because that is something which matters in Japan much more than actual skill set. What at the end of the day, a Japanese recruiter or a recruiter sitting in Japan for a Japanese company or otherwise, all they're trying to evaluate is that can they trust you with this particular set of responsibilities. Whether you have the skill set or not is secondary. Are you trustworthy? And then do you have the right attitude? These are the first two questions which they are trying to answer to themselves. Skill set, of course, is comes the third. Not that just having a skill set wouldn't cut it, right? So, but these are in general, would be
Uh,
my advice.
Yeah, definitely. I think skills someone can learn over time, but soft skills like, being trustworthy, being sincere are something that are traits of a person and how he treats himself and other colleagues. I think those are kind
True.
of important factors. But can you also point out some of the difference in interviews that happen in India versus how interviews happen in Japan?
Yeah, it's a whole new game, right? In Japan as well, there's a campus recruitments from Japanese universities and so on and so forth, right? So yeah, clearly they're, trustworthy, how disciplined you are, how good a team player you are. Those are the key aspects which are being judged, right? Rather than your skill sets. Are you able to think on your feet? How quickly can you learn and adapt to a new situation, right? Because when it comes to fresher recruitment in Japan, both Japanese companies as well as the candidate tends to uh, look at a job from a very long perspective, right? There used to be a time when candidates used to, think that once they join a company, they're going to retire from there. And they used to, right? The generations so far were of that mindset. That is shifting slowly, but it is a lot of places you'll still find it, right? So that's basically from a fresher campus recruitment perspective. When it comes to lateral hire, in lateral hires, a lot of places what I have seen is that because it's such a high context environment, either somebody has heard about you or your skill set or your involvement in a specific project which where there are parallels to be drawn. So clearly there are the references do play a good role, not only from the past companies but your past manager, the kind of projects you have been involved in, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to switch from one role to another or one industry to another, you ought to have somebody who is trusting in you as an individual and not what you have delivered. So somebody who is keen to look at your future and a possibility rather than what you have done in past. And predominantly that comes with very high quality references or involvement in projects in companies where things tend to go well. So that's basic observation which I've seen.
A good one, Dipesh. So, are there any, for the fun part, to impress some Japanese interviewer, are there any kind of keywords or verbs that people can use in Japanese?
Oh, absolutely. So, yeah, before I give you a few words, let me tell you one thing very sincerely, that no matter how much you are able to speak Japanese or how correctly you are able to speak Japanese, Japanese in general tend to respect people who are actually making an effort to understand, learn not only the language but culture, the food, the those kind of aspects. So if you do make your effort clearly and make it clearly visible, you for sure can expect the other person to step one foot forward to be able to meet you somewhere in between. That being said, a whole lot of words are out there. Konnichiwa, a simple thank you. Thank you is arigato, arigato gozaimasu. So these small pleasantries do tend to bring out the chuckle and smiles on the faces, and that can help you relieve a lot of pressure sometimes which exists in the air when it comes to a lot of silence moments when nobody's asking question. There are 100 questions they need to ask, but there's nobody asking. So yeah, these kind of moments do tend to bring that icebreaker moment. So do feel free. That would be my advice. Do feel free to use these small words, konnichiwa, arigato, and so on and so forth. So as to create that person to person connection.
Nice, amazing. So, I personally have been a fan of Japanese culture, food. I kind of love to eat sushi, and
Nice.
since I kind of bought my first Onitsuka Tiger shoes, I always wanted to visit Japan, and I have not got a chance, but I soon will. The farthest east I've been is to Hong Kong, but totally different worlds. And but definitely,
You're most welcome.
definitely I would. Thanks, Dipesh, for taking out the time to guide us. And if you have any further questions, you can post it in comments or reach out to Dipesh on his LinkedIn. He would be happy to help, I'm sure. So thanks a lot, Dipesh, for doing.
Thank you, Gaurav, for your time. I enjoyed this conversation. Take care.